For 2 years, dense forest was the one thing on the Ukrainian front that drones could not solve. Under summer canopy, Russian infantry massed, supply paths ran, and dugouts sat invisible to every camera Ukraine could put in the air. Then Ukrainian units stopped trying to see through the trees and started removing them. A quadcopter with no warhead at all flies low along a tree line and pours molten metal burning at 2,000 degrees behind it, roughly 100 meters at a pass. What that fire exposes matters far more than what it burns. The footage that made this tactic famous is only a few seconds long, and it looks nothing like a normal drone strike. There is no flash, no fireball, no vehicle folding in on itself. There is a drone moving slowly along the top of a tree line at night, and behind it a curtain of white sparks falling straight down through the branches like liquid welding. The trees do not explode. They catch. And within a minute, the canopy that was hiding an entire section of Russian defensive position is a burning stripe visible from 10 kilometers away. Ukraine's Ministry of Defense publicly confirmed the tactic in early September 2024 on the Kharkiv axis in the fighting around Vovchansk. Since then it has spread. Multiple brigades now field the thing, footage of it has come off half a dozen sectors, and Russian mill bloggers have spent the better part of a year arguing about what to do with a weapon that does not target the soldier at all. It targets the thing the soldier is standing under. This is not a story about one destroyed vehicle. It is a story about a piece of terrain being taken away from an army that had learned to live inside it. And it is a story about how cheap that turned out to be. But before the fire, you need to understand why the forest mattered so much in the first place, and why a drone army with thousands of cameras in the sky was, in specific places, almost blind. Start with the map. Ukraine's eastern front is not open steppe from end to end, whatever the drone footage of burning columns in flat fields suggests. Along the Lyman axis in the north of Donetsk region and pushing into Luhansk region, the ground is heavily wooded. The Serebryansky forest, the block of pine and mixed woodland west of Kreminna, often just called the Kreminna Forest, has been fought over continuously since 2022. Sandy soil, pine plantation in long straight rows. Firebreak lanes cut through it on a grid, old Soviet forestry tracks. It is terrain that swallows infantry. The same is true on other axes in different forms. Tree lines, the narrow strips of planted windbreak that divide Ukrainian farm fields, sometimes only 15 meters wide and several kilometers long, run across almost every sector in the east and south. They are not forests, they are corridors, and they have shaped this war more than most people outside it realize. Here is why. An FPV drone sees with a small camera, usually analog, usually mounted at a fixed angle, flying at somewhere between 20 and 100 meters. Its operator is looking at a screen showing a narrow cone of the world. Against a vehicle in an open field, that is enough. Against a man lying in a shallow trench under 3 layers of pine branches with a camouflage net over the top, it is close to useless. The operator can fly the same lane 4 times and see needles, shadow, and more needles. Thermal cameras help, and Ukrainian units use them extensively at night, but thermal is not magic either. A canopy blocks infrared the same way it blocks visible light. A hot body under dense green cover reads, from above, as a slightly warm patch of forest. Add summer heat soaking into the ground all day and radiating back after dark, and the contrast an operator needs simply is not there. So the forest became armor. Not metaphorically, functionally. Russian assault groups on the Lyman axis learned to stage inside woodland, move along tree lines rather than across open ground, dig their positions where root systems and trunk cover would break up the blast of an FPV warhead, and keep vehicles under branches at every halt. The tree line was the road, the shelter, the ammunition dump, and the casualty collection point. Entire rotations happened without a single meter of open ground being crossed in daylight. And the standard counter did not scale. You can put an FPV into a tree line, and Ukrainian operators do it thousands of times a month. But a 1-kilogram warhead detonating against a pine trunk destroys a very small volume of forest. Artillery does more, but artillery costs shells, and Ukraine has spent this entire war rationing shells. Incendiary artillery exists and is heavily restricted in use. Clearing several hundred meters of woodland with conventional fires means a fire mission budget nobody has. That is the problem the Dragon drone was built to solve. And the solution came from a place nobody in a defense procurement office would have looked, a hardware store. Thermite is not a modern invention and it is not classified. It is a mixture of aluminum powder and iron oxide, rust, in roughly the right proportions. Ignite it, and the aluminum strips the oxygen off the iron in a reaction so energetic it produces molten iron, and a temperature reported in the range of 2000 to 2200 degrees Celsius. Ukrainian technical reporting has put the thermite charge itself at around $12 worth of material. $12. It was used to weld railway track in the 19th century and it is still used to weld railway track today. Thermite does not explode. That is the whole point, and it is the part most viewers get wrong on first watching. There is no blast wave, no fragmentation, no overpressure. It burns. It burns downward through whatever it lands on, and it does not care whether that thing is wet, whether it is buried, or whether there is oxygen available in the surrounding air. The reaction carries its own oxidizer. You cannot put it out with water. Water thrown onto burning thermite flashes to steam and scatters molten metal further. Now put roughly 500 grams of that on a standard FPV quadcopter, in a housing that dispenses rather than detonates. With an igniter, the operator triggers from the ground station. According to Ukrainian reporting on the system, that load burns for about 20 seconds and covers roughly 100 meters of ground if the drone is flown at the right speed and the right height. The drone does not need to hit anything. It needs to fly a line. The nickname came fast. Dragon drone, Dracaris. Ukrainian units are not subtle about naming things, and a quadcopter that flies down a tree line breathing white fire earns the name honestly. The engineering that matters is not the thermite. Anyone can mix thermite. It is the dispenser. You are carrying a substance that, once lit, burns hotter than the melting point of the aluminum frame carrying it, on an airframe that has to stay controllable while its payload changes mass, and while its own underside is being subjected to a heat source that will destroy it. The workshop problem is, how do you get the fire out of the aircraft fast enough that it never gets into the aircraft? Early units burned themselves out of the sky. The versions that spread across the front in 2025 did not. There is a second design constraint that tells you something about how Ukrainian drone units actually work. The Dragon has to be built from a standard FPV airframe. The same frames the unit is already buying by the hundred, the same batteries, the same video transmitters, the same goggles, the same repair parts. A weapon that requires its own supply chain does not reach the front in useful numbers. A payload module that bolts onto the frame a workshop is already producing reaches every squad in the brigade within a month. That is why this spread the way it did. By mid-2025, footage of thermite passes was coming off multiple sectors of the front, released by units on their own official channels. Not a prototype, a tool. But a tool has to be aimed, and this one is aimed differently from every other drone in the arsenal. To understand how, you have to sit in the operator's chair for a while, because before anything burns, somebody spends days deciding which 100 meters of forest matters. And the decision that answers that question is the one Russian commanders never adjusted to. Take a tree line, a real one of the kind that runs along thousands of kilometers of the Eastern Front, 15 to 30 meters wide, 2 kilometers long. On the map it is a green hairline between two gray fields. On the ground it is a linear fortress. Reconnaissance builds the picture over days, not minutes. A Ukrainian brigade's unmanned systems company runs surveillance drones, Mavic-class quadcopters, fixed-wing recon platforms higher up over the same strip repeatedly at different times of day in different light. They are not looking for soldiers. They are looking for the traces soldiers leave. A footpath worn into the grass at the edge of the trees where there was no footpath last week. Spoil from fresh digging that is a different color than the surrounding soil. A vehicle track that enters the tree line and does not come out. A thermal signature at 4 in the morning in the same spot 3 nights running. That last one is how a dugout gets found. Not by seeing it. By seeing that something warm is in the same place too often. Then the picture gets layered. Radio intercepts on Russian tactical nets tell you where a company command post sits, roughly, by which position other stations are talking to. Prisoner interrogations fill in the layout. Recovered maps and hand-drawn sketches, the kind that always end up in assault groups' pockets, fill in more. And artillery observation over weeks builds a picture of where fire draws a reaction and where it does not. What emerges is not a list of targets. It is a shape. A logistics path that runs the length of the tree line under cover, feeding 2 or 3 fortified positions at the far end, with a casualty and rotation point somewhere in the middle where the canopy is thickest. An FPV strike on any single point in that chain hurts for a day. The path is a footpath. Footpaths repair themselves the moment somebody walks them again. So the Dragon is not aimed at a point. It is aimed at the segment, the specific 200 or 300 meters where the cover is doing the most work. And here is the part that separates this from every other munition. The operator flies with the fire, not into it. The approach is low and slow. Not the 60+ kilometers per hour of a strike run, but a controlled pass along the crown of the trees, close enough that the falling thermite reaches the ground layer, high enough that the drone survives its own payload. 20 seconds is a long time to be flying straight and level over a defended position. In FPV terms, it is an eternity. A strike drone is exposed for 2 or 3 seconds on final approach. A Dragon on a pass is exposed for the whole burn, at low speed, on a predictable line, glowing white and visible to every set of eyes within kilometers. Anything with a rifle can engage it. Electronic warfare jammers can cut the link mid-pass. Which is why these missions are almost always flown at night, almost always with a second drone up as overwatch, and almost always timed to a moment when the position's attention is somewhere else, often immediately after conventional FPV or mortar activity on a different part of the line. 20 seconds bought with a diversion. The first pass is usually not the whole job. It is the opener. And what happens in the 90 seconds after the drone turns away is where the tactic actually pays. Here is that sequence, the way a forest cover strike unfolds on a defended tree line at night, 2 in the morning. The Overwatch drone is already up, sitting 300 meters off the tree line at altitude, thermal camera running, feeding a second operator on a separate screen. The strip has been under observation for 11 days. The command has picked a 180-meter segment where recon logged 3 separate warm signatures at the same hours across 4 nights, plus a vehicle track entering the wood line and never re-emerging. The Dragon lifts off from a launch point behind the line and runs in at 50 meters, dropping as it closes. On the operator's screen, the tree line is a black mass against slightly less black field. He does not need to see individual positions. He needs the crown line, the top edge of the canopy, and he needs to hold his altitude just above it. Ignition. On the goggles, the picture whites out for half a second as the camera's automatic gain fights a light source that is, at that moment, one of the brightest things in Donetsk region. Then the image settles, and the operator is flying inside a shower of falling sparks, watching the tops of the pines slide past underneath. The thermite does not fall as a stream. It falls as a rain of burning particles that hit the canopy, punch through it, catch on dry needles on branch litter. On the accumulated dead material that carpets the floor of every managed pine plantation. Where it lands on something man-made, it does something different. Camouflage netting, synthetic and used everywhere by both armies, does not burn slowly. It goes up in seconds and the burning material drips. Timber dugout roofing catches and keeps catching. Stored fuel, if there is any, ends the discussion immediately. 12 seconds in, the fire behind the drone stops being a series of points and becomes a line. On the Overwatch feed, the thermal picture inverts. Where there had been a uniform gray mass of forest, there is now a blazing white stripe, and around it, moving away from it, small bright shapes that were not visible 30 seconds earlier. People, that is the entire point of the weapon. It is not primarily a killing tool. It is a tool that converts a concealed position into a visible one, and the conversion happens in under a minute. The Dragon's 20 seconds end. The payload is spent. The drone climbs, turns, and heads home, and it is still a functioning aircraft, which is worth noting because unlike every strike FPV in this war, it comes back. Now the second phase starts, and it is fast because everything about the mission was staged for it. Conventional strike FPVs are already in the air, launched before the pass. They come in on a burning tree line where the thermal contrast is now absolute, and where the men who had been undercover are moving in the open between positions. Mortar fire is registered onto pre-plotted points along the same segment. The Overwatch operator calls corrections against a picture that, for the first time in 11 days of observation, actually shows him what is there. Assault groups staged in the tree line for dawn attack lose their staging area. Ammunition stockpiled under branch cover is inside the burn. Vehicles parked where nobody could see them are now parked in a fire. And the fire does not stop when the fighting does. That is the part that separates this from a strike. A destroyed vehicle is a single event. A burned tree line is a change to the map. Forest fire on the Eastern Front in summer does not politely stay where it was started. Pine plantation with years of accumulated needle litter and no forestry management since 2022 is close to ideal fuel. What a drone starts as a 180-meter stripe can run for hundreds of meters more with the wind. And both armies have spent whole summers dealing with fires that nobody entirely controls, including fires started by ordinary artillery, which has been burning the woodland along this front since the first summer of the war. What is left when the burn goes out is the real product. Bare trunks, no needles, no branch cover in the lower and middle canopy, no camouflage netting anywhere in the burn zone, and a ground surface of black ash on which every footprint, every track, every disturbed patch of soil reads from the air like ink on paper. A defensive position in a burned tree line is not a defensive position anymore. It is a hole in the ground with a number on it. That is what makes this weapon strategically interesting rather than just visually spectacular. It does not destroy the enemy. It destroys the enemy's ability to be invisible. And on a front where invisibility is the difference between an assault group that reaches its start line and an assault group that gets picked apart at the staging area, that is worth more than another burned personnel carrier. The consequences show up in what Russian units have to do differently, and none of the options are cheap. Option 1, disperse. Stop concentrating in the good cover, spread the assault group across a wider frontage. Except that command and control gets harder, and that mutual support between positions weakens. That is a real cost paid every day. Option 2, dig deeper. Overhead cover that survives molten metal means earth and concrete, not timber and netting. That means engineering effort, materials trucked forward on roads that Ukrainian FPVs already hunt, and time spent digging instead of attacking. Option 3, rely on electronic warfare. Jam the Dragon before it starts its pass. This works. Russian EW along the Eastern Front is dense and effective, and Ukrainian drone units lose airframes to it constantly. But EW emitters radiate, and everything that radiates on this front eventually gets located and struck. Every jammer moved forward to protect a tree line is a jammer that has announced itself. Option 4, accept the burn and shift the position after every strike. That means the tree line stops being a fixed asset and becomes a temporary one, which is exactly the effect Ukraine was after in the first place. There is a fifth response, and Russian millblogger commentary has spent a year circling it without landing on anything useful. Build the same thing. The technology is not exotic. The chemistry is 19th century. What is hard to copy is not the thermite. It is the workshop network behind it, the hundreds of small Ukrainian production cells that can take an idea from a Telegram video to a bolt-on module on a standard airframe across multiple brigades in a matter of months, because they are already building the airframes and already talking to the operators who will fly them. That is the actual weapon. The thermite is the demonstration. Now, the caution that keeps this story honest. The forest fighting on the Lyman axis, the Serebryansky woods west of Kreminna, where Ukraine's 63rd Separate Mechanized Brigade has held ground through daily Russian assaults, is one of the most drone-saturated woodland battles of the entire war. Ukrainian commanders there have described attrition rates on attacking Russian equipment of 80 to 90%, achieved by drones and artillery working together. That figure comes from one side of the line, and it should be read as a commander's assessment rather than an audited count. What is not in dispute is that the Kreminna woods have consumed Russian assault groups continuously, month after month, for over 3 years, and that drones are the reason. Whether Dragon drones specifically have burned that particular forest is a different question, and it is one this story does not need to answer. The tactic is confirmed. Its adoption across multiple brigades is confirmed. The problem it solves, dense cover on forested axes, is the defining tactical problem of exactly that kind of ground. Which brings the story back to the $12. Not $12 for the drone. The airframe, the battery, the video link, the flight controller, the dispenser housing, all of that costs what a tactical FPV costs, and Ukraine builds those by the hundreds of thousands. But the part that does the work, the part that takes a defensive position built over months and turns it into an open field, is aluminum powder and rust. Against that, weigh what a Russian battalion invests in a wooded sector. Weeks of engineering, timber hauled forward, netting, fuel and ammunition pre-staged under cover, vehicles parked in the trees rather than driven back each night. The accumulated confidence of a commander who has decided that a particular strip of forest is the safe part of his sector and has planned his rotations, his casualty evacuation and his next assault around that assumption. That assumption is the target, not the timber. There is one more thing this weapon does that does not show up in any damage assessment, and it is the reason Russian channels talk about it far more than its raw destruction figures justify. A soldier can rationalize artillery. He can rationalize an FPV. He has seen 1,000 of them. He knows the sound, he knows the drill, he knows some of them miss. What he cannot easily rationalize is watching the forest above his head turn into falling molten metal while the thing that dropped it flies away intact and comes back the next night. Cover that has kept him alive for 6 months stops being cover in 20 seconds. That does something to a defensive line that no crater does. The open loop from the start of this, what the fire exposes matters more than what it burns. That is the whole doctrine in one line. The thermite is not the munition. The thermite is the illumination. It removes the roof, and everything Ukraine already has in the air does the rest. FPVs that could not see a target now see 15. Thermal cameras that read a uniform gray forest now read individual men against black ash. Artillery that was firing at grid squares is now firing at things it can watch. Russia's answer to the drone war on the Eastern Front has been to hide deeper, further back. Under more cover, behind more jamming. The Dragon drone is Ukraine's answer to hiding, and it costs the price of a hardware store's worth of rust and aluminum to deliver. The forest along the Lyman axis was, for 3 years, the one place on the Eastern Front where a Russian assault group could assemble without being watched. Ukrainian workshops turned it into the one place where they can be watched best. Another invader learned that 100 meters of pine cover is not the same thing as protection on ground he had no business standing on. The trees are still burning in places. The map underneath them is finally visible.